Gentlemen, welcome to the Mass Construction Show. Rob, Jason, welcome back. Chris, welcome anew.
Thank you.
Hello.
We're getting no comments. Everybody's quiet.
Good to see you guys.
Good to see everybody.
Good morning.
Jason and Rob having been on together before, so they should be used to this. Today is a topic about quality, right? We're going to call it quality. There's a lot of people who say QA, QC, quality assurance, quality control. And what it seemed like is, I would say over the past 5 to 7 years, at least I've noticed a kind of renewed attention or new attention to quality. I can't say I've quite figured out why, and it's really anecdotal. It's a lot more job descriptions popping out where I see, oh, here's a director of quality, director of QA, QC, a quality control position that might be more on par with a project manager, some field folks that are getting those titles. So I'd ask you guys, do you have any sense on why all of a sudden, and maybe it's not all of a sudden, maybe it's just me, but why as of late has it been much more attention to quality? Go for it, Jason.
I think let everybody jump in at once there. It's the same answer as every question you could possibly ask, Joe. It's money. Follow the money trail. Now, it doesn't always answer why you, at least in your head, see that increase over the last several years. But we now have the ability over the last several years to track the minutia on a project where previously, maybe from a technology standpoint, we really didn't have a method of tracking it. And we see that connection. We've always kind of known that connection between losses or money spent and having a really good quality program. And now we're kind of combining the two. We have the method to track it, and we're seeing those dollar losses in real time. That's my take on it.
Yeah, and I would agree with Jason. I think one of the things as well is the insurance market is getting harder. The expectations on the insurers is getting more with quality programs and so forth. But the idea of quality has always been there. I think it's heightened. Schedules are harder. They're faster. Projects are getting more complex. So losses then become more real and bigger and harder to deal with in the project constraints. So having a good QC program really goes hand in hand to make sure we're trying to control those major exposures.
Feel the same, Chris?
Yeah, one last piece to it, I think, is the changes in the labor market that we're seeing. We're having a lot harder time finding people, skilled labor in the industry, and providing that extra layer of checks and balances helps protect our interest in the outcome of the project and our reputations.
That's a very good point. So there's two things. You have labor and data, right? So when Jason says it's money, right? Well, it's always been money. So why all of a sudden would people care about money? But they just didn't know where they were losing that money. Right now people know, okay, hey, there's some real cost being lost here because we're able to track things better now. And then on the labor front, we all know that labor has been an issue where, the whole hourglass concept of, the last downturn was the Gen X, who was already a small slice of the workforce as it was comparatively to the baby boomers. You had a smaller slice. And then when the downturn happened, they were still newer in the business, so they were able to leave. So we ended up with a lot more older, experienced folks. And now we have this big push of younger, less experienced folks filling in that gap. So that would make sense. Never mind just less people, right? On the whole, I would say.
Yeah, we're seeing a lot younger individuals get promoted to higher positions in our subcontractor teams, and it's impactful because they haven't gotten the exposure and lessons learned in history.
Yeah, I mean, I would venture to say we see it in the CMs, GCs as well, though, too, right? I mean, how many,
Yeah.
30-year-old PXs are like roaming around now, or I'm just like, how'd that happen, right?
Yep.
So okay, so that's interesting. It was funny. We didn't pre-script this, but I'm surprised how well you guys pinned down that that's actually true, that there is more of a focus, and that seems quite reasonable between the labor, large losses, and being able to track the small ones, that pushes the focus there. So individually, and maybe we start with Rob, how, because I want to say a couple of things. There's going to be a follow-up podcast here. This one is on everybody in the room is at director level. So how are your companies looking at it from a big picture? And then the hope is to have some follow-up kind of boots on the ground type podcast at how are people figuring out quality control on site. So with that said, I'd like to go to everybody individually and start with Rob. How is your company looking at quality management from a big picture perspective?
We see it as one of the most important things we do out in the field. Obviously, we have, we want to deliver a project that exceeds owner and architect expectations every time. And there's lots of little steps, thousands of little steps along the way that help us do that. So we, I would say over the last, like you said, probably 4 to 5 years, we've made a big push to elevate our team's awareness around quality control, our programs around it, how we subcontractors. But I would definitely say that it's a regular conversation at a high level, and it's a daily conversation now at the job level with our teams. And, again, it's all about continually improving. I think Jason alluded to that. We're changing every day. Projects are moving, really fast. And, we got to address things as they come up. And so, over that period of time, getting into programs that help our teams efficiently do that, how we track those items to closure is really important, not leaving some of these things open-ended. So I would say that, we look at it as one of the top priority things that we do on a daily basis.
So is it to some degree a way to manage the large traffic flow, for lack of a better word, the amount of things that are coming at you at such a pace that if you don't have those systems in place, that's going to get you bit? Is that how you guys look at it?
Yeah, I would say that's probably kind of how we started down this road where we went more formal. Because our superintendents and our field teams, they have a lot going on every single day. And so we've tried to help them kind of streamline for them, what our top items are, and then filtering down into, some of the lesser items, but really making a focus on what our top loss exposures are that we've experienced over the years. And then, coming up with best practices to help mitigate those from repeating them in the future on projects, because a lot of what we do is very similar in nature, job over job. So we try to learn from that through lessons learned and conversation and communication with our teams and communicating that out to the entire company. So it's become a really big emphasis throughout the company.
How about you guys, Chris? From a big picture, how's Bond looking at it?
So historically, it's been everyone's responsibility, with the superintendents held accountable for quality control. The buck stops there. But we've been really focusing and are continuing to look at these ways to improve that. It's far deeper than just the field. It's all the way back to your interview and RFP response through pre-construction, and how the PM office staff does their submittals, drawing reviews, and sets up the guy in the field.
Hey, Chris,
is really the backbone.
Chris, forgive me for interrupting. If it's possible, guys, could we mute when other people are talking, just because I'm hearing other interference, and I can deal with editing out the if there's any clunkiness, people start talking beforehand.
Yeah, I think it's coming from Rob, but yeah, I'll mute.
Yep.
All right. I'm sorry to break your train of thought there, Chris, but go ahead.
Oh,
No, I mean, that was the train. But yeah, it's all the way from that RFP pre-con through estimating, and then the PM office side, looking at the submittals, RFIs, drawing reviews. It's much deeper than the superintendents being accountable, because at that point you're doing quality control rather than preparing yourself for quality assurance.
Yeah, were you really looking at it as, okay, that's the end of the line, right? If we're
Yep.
counting for it to work there, then this, it's just that's our last shot, right? We should really be looking at it on all those steps along the way, right?
Yes.
Okay. So, Jason, how about you guys at Lee Kennedy?
big picture, it's funny. We're starting to look at it. When I say starting, I'll put it in context. It's probably 3 to 4 years where we've really defined the process. In the old days, you have a set of drawings and you have several volumes of specifications, right? And the specifications, for the most part, define quality, or they reference other standards that define quality, and that's kind of where it stopped, right? So for us, we've had a lot of success on the safety side, defining the process, and really, to put a point on it, taking our existing construction process, how we build buildings at Lee Kennedy, and integrating safety into that existing process. There are steps along the way where we can integrate certain items and get a lot of traction or success just by integrating it into our existing process, not creating it as something separate. We're adding these small pieces of these small steps. And in the last 3 or 4 years, from a big picture standpoint, we've done the same thing with quality. And we're starting to see that same kind of success that we have, or we've had, with safety. So it's weaving it into everything that we already do as a company that's going to produce results. And I'm not saying that we have the top of the line program yet, but we've come leaps and bounds from where we were a few years ago, and we think it's starting to pay dividends, meaning we're starting to see our losses go down, which is nice.
And now you have, and you're one of the companies that I've seen has staff with that title, correct?
Correct.
Okay. And I believe, Chris, you guys as well actually have some folks with, quality management or quality control in their title, or?
So we have a quality manager, lost them to the software company that we were using. So we are now really doing it just more, and we've got some key individuals, and they're doing a mentoring role, a quality mentor, supporting the project team, supporting others, but not a direct named individual with a quality title right now.
Do you think you'll look to fill that, or are you going to go with the new model of it?
I like just reinforcing and supporting the teams and having somebody there to back them up. It takes away the conflict of, well, the quality manager should be doing that scenario when they come out to a job site, but just like safety, they can't be everywhere. So the superintendent, the fields, the office side, they need to have their own accountability.
Okay. So it's nice to have that person that can just drive quality on the job, but not necessarily be the person that's responsible for the execution, right?
Yep. They're a process individual compared to an expert in the systems. Okay. In the install.
Great. So like, if we happen to clip this, so here's kind of a process flow chart that Jason sent to me about what Lee Kennedy is doing from a quality standpoint, but I'm only showing it because Jason just mentioned how quality is interjected in all the steps along the way. And here it talks about like who the responsible party is, from project award, project setup in Procore, schedule, page turn, kickoff meetings, procurement logs, descoping, closeouts, QA kickoff, subcontractor kickoff. So all the process that you go through all the way through punch list and then closeout, and who's responsible, and then what are the milestones that they're looking for in each one of those sections. So I thought that was a great way to break it down. Now hearing Jason talk, it's kind of the way that they are integrating it across the entire process, rather than like Rob was saying, wait until the end of the line, or as Chris is saying, trying to throw it all in somebody's lap, right? It's just part of the process. And I almost feel like that's where hopefully technology goes, right? Where we're not ending up with a BIM guy anymore, right? And we're moving to that just VDC is part of your job as a project manager, as a superintendent, or a scheduler, or whatever. That's part of the process. So I think that's great. I think that it would be nice to see if all companies could get there, where it's just integrated into part of their entire process. I don't know if anybody disagrees with that, or okay.
No, that's exactly how we've done it as well, Joe. Where we look at it more as a team responsibility. Ultimately, the superintendent in the field team doing the day in and day out of the inspections and reviews and things, but the APMs, the PMs, all the way back get involved from the beginning as well.
Yeah, it might even be helpful. And I know it's human nature just to say we, but maybe just for people that are listening to only the audio, maybe just say we at Dellbrook, or we at Lee Kennedy, or Bond, or whatever, just so people know exactly which perspective they're hearing. So again, this is one that I want to give to everybody rather than focus on one person. So maybe let's start with Jason. Where does Lee Kennedy see their biggest exposure when it comes to not having quality in place? Like, where do you see particular, and I think I'm talking about particular types of work, right? Everyone automatically kind of goes to curtain wall or building envelope being a big one. What are kind of the ones that really move the needle as far as from a cost perspective?
It's kind of a trick question, Joe, but I'll try and answer. Thanks for trying to confuse me and the audience, but whatever, I'll try.
Yeah. Oh, you know what? Let me make it more confusing.
Oh yeah, great.
Maybe if it's not even just a dollar amount, maybe it's just difficulty, right? Like, okay, if we have a leak, it might not at the end of the day cost us a tremendous amount of money, but trying to chase that thing down is just, from a schedule standpoint and a headache standpoint, is so difficult. So what are kind of the gnarly areas of work that you guys see that, hey, we really got to straighten these out because they cost us a lot of money, they screw us with the schedule, or they are just really difficult challenges that we get frustrated with?
All right. It's again, trick question.
I lied. I made it worse.
Quick answer. So that we have some big, some large money losses, right? And for the most part, for us, historically, it's been water. From a quality standpoint, it's been water. It's been leaks, whether that is through a curtain wall system or through some mechanical or plumbing system. It's historically been water for us. So those are our largest loss leaders. But what we're starting to realize, and why measurement of the details is so important, is when you add up those million little paper cuts that we seem to sustain over and over and over again. And I'm going to give you a good example here. Those million little paper cuts are adding up to what we think is a pretty substantial loss, right? We're calling it a loss, but it's money. It's money in rework. Here's an example. We put together a lessons learned app so that anytime that somebody has a lessons learned, either they've done something very, very well in the field, or more often than not, we screwed something up. So we put together a lessons learned app where anybody in the field can jump on in real time on their phone, say, hey, we missed this detail and it led to this, or hey, we didn't buy this right, we don't think, and it led to this, we missed some scope or something like that. Any lessons learned at all. You're not satisfied with the benefits, or maybe there's something else out there. And I mean it. It's a lessons learned. It goes into the system. But from a quality standpoint, people are using this lessons learned app, and we have a committee that once a month goes through every new lessons learned that gets submitted. And you do that for a year and a half. And one of the things that we figured out is, oh my God, we screw up studs. Yep, we screw up studs all the time. We deliver the wrong type of stud to a job and then install, in some cases, the wrong type of stud to a job. And we do it over and over and over again. But we would never know that until we started to capture this stuff. So it's one of our biggest loss leaders in lessons learned was studs.
Yeah, that goes to anecdotally. You always talk with subcontractors when they're out on site, and they always say like, "Oh yeah, the GC does this wrong every time," right? Like, "Oh, we're going to go out. We know they're going to do it this way. Same company, same job, and they do the same thing," right? You regularly hear that, so that's an interesting way to capture it using an app. Because the first place I went is like, well, who's going to monitor that app? But you just have a committee that looks at the stuff. And if it's not quality, no pun intended, if it's not quality lessons learned, does it get just pulled out? Like that's all right, that's a bad observation or whatever.
Yeah, we have the ability to hide that or just to click a box to track it for future trending. If we think we've seen it again. So we have different ways to categorize it.
Okay. How about you, Chris? What are the big pain points?
I mean, a lot of our big pain points come around the MEPs. We do such heavy infrastructure or utility type jobs that we can't close up a ceiling or a system's not ready to start in time. And what we find is a lot of those issues are being driven off of the submittals. And it's either deep comments or specifics that are inside of the specifications that aren't caught in the submittal review. And a design team doesn't provide the red line back, adding that little detail, because they may not even be aware of it because they're not the ones that wrote the spec. Or it's a red line of a change on the submittal to the approach that differs from the documents, and the follow through of that into the field can be complicated.
And now who has been the end of the line person that's picking that up? Because that would seem like it could be something that's pretty technical. Like, is it the owner? Is it the engineer that's doing their weekly walks or whatever for their field reports? Like, how is that getting picked up? Or is it just that it ends up being a clash?
So it'll end up being like the field engineer will come out for one of their inspections. The MEP engineer will come out for an inspection in their field report. That detail will come to light at that point.
Okay. Interesting. I like that. How about you, Rob?
So we took a similar approach to what Jason was talking about, where we looked at, over the last handful of years, where have our losses been, what contributed to them, those types of items. And we made those 4 or 5 things highlights. Obviously, building envelope is a consistent challenge, especially today. The designs of the facades, the many different types of ABs, how they tie together, how the different facade types tie together. Sometimes they're challenging. Water systems, kind of all-encompassing water systems. They've notoriously been our largest losses that we've sustained over time. Moisture in concrete slabs, before we're going to put floors down, making sure we're paying attention there. There's very detailed testing requirements to things when you look at the flooring manufacturers or the specs, so really paying attention to that. So those have been, that's kind of, we took it kind of high level. If we're going to focus our time, where we're going to focus to help minimize losses, large losses, that's where we're at. But then we also look at, from a divisional inspection standpoint, what are our other higher risk, long-term construction defect related issues or potentials, because knowing what state you're working in, the statutes that apply on how long construction defects you own them for. So we look at those at a project level as well, to help identify with the team, where the focus really needs to be to help minimize the larger things. But it is the little finite details that really do add up over time. So we're tracking them similar to what Jason had mentioned, trying to get a handle on trends and things like that to provide lessons and provide best practices to our teams over time.
Okay. Let's start with Jason on this one. Microphone on?
It is.
Okay. All right. Sounded like a problem. Let's start with Jason on this one. Everybody has kind of alluded to, whether it was Chris talking about redlining of documents when it gets passed along the process. You, Jason, were very, clear about it, or about Lee Kennedy's approach that it needs to be part of the entire process. Rob as well. When we looked at your chart, there's a lot of bubbles on there in that process chart. How do we manage getting that information from one place to another? And I guess it could be kind of holistically said as, how do we handle the communication, right? How do we make sure that information, like Chris was talking about, that gets redlined in one part of the process makes it to that person out in the field installing?
Yeah, that's the key, isn't it? For us, and I think you're going to get a pretty similar answer from everybody else, but it's technology. So you think about the old days, whether it was a procurement or a submit. When I say the old days, I mean last year. Procurement or submittal log, and running those procurement or submittal logs in something like Excel, and then we had to chase something. Well, how do you track that and whether or not it's done? And now we use Procore to assign a task or to track a certain task or something that's been delegated to somebody, so that we know that we've captured it. And again, we're not claiming that we're perfect, but we're getting much, much better at closing the loop on all of those items that we have to track down through closure, where something like an Excel spreadsheet or an engineer's report that doesn't make it into some mechanism that we can track, things have fallen through the crack historically. So that's how we ensure that each one of the steps in the process are done, and that any of those minutiae, those details, are assigned to somebody.
Does everybody feel the same? It can be even just a yes.
Yeah, we utilize Procore as well to do a lot of the similar.
Yeah. So it's really about
use BIM 360 for it as well.
So you're using some measure of technologies to assign an item to somebody, and therefore hold them accountable, but not just about holding them accountable, but just making sure that it's done. The question I have then, and I guess both of these are very difficult questions to answer, and we probably wouldn't be having this conversation if we knew these. How do things still fall through the cracks then?
I got that one.
Please.
It's human instinct. We're all real busy on the job sites and think that we can conquer the world and do it all and miss things. So, and one of the problems that we're having with that is people reporting up their mistakes. And nobody wants to look like they had an error on their job site. That's been the biggest thing for us from a communication standpoint on quality, is we don't have nearly as many issues or items that do occur in a job site get documented, because who wants to have the report card that says, I had 10,000 issues on my job? Though one of my favorite jobs that I highlight when I talk to people is a job that had 14,000 issues, and by the time they got to punch list, they were down to 100 issues. But they had 14,000 through the life of the job.
Wow.
Because they were managing it.
Yeah, that's a great point. Does anybody else struggle with people wanting to essentially hide their losses?
No, I don't know if it's necessarily, I think the common theme is that we we can get through it, we can figure it out, and then, but before you know it, you're too far down the rabbit hole and you can't get back out of it without it becoming a bigger issue. So we encourage, obviously, the entire team to get involved. So we have monthly team meetings. Every job has a monthly QC call. The entire team is on it, where we talk about, okay, what's happened in the past, where are we today, what's coming up, in the next month, 2 months of major items, or things that are just happening out there that we need to all jump in and help resolve if there are any. So yeah, it's definitely, I think it's just human nature to help, or where people just think they'll just get through it, they'll figure it out, and off they go.
Chris, what did you mean when you say reported up?
Well, so letting the project executive know, letting leadership operations know, that type of deal. They don't want to highlight. Nobody wants to put a spotlight on their own project, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because they're having a lot of issues. It leaves a perception of a poor managed and maintained project, where a lot of positive observations and issues being addressed early can be actually a good sign for a job, and that you're staying on top of things. So it's a perception thing.
Going with that, 14,000 down to 100 at closeout time. Do you guys, and now this might be more boots on the ground, but I'm curious, have you guys started incorporating like earlier punch on things, or like phased punching at all?
Oh yeah, we certainly have a pre-punch that we're doing, but it also came down to just a lot of that death by 1,000 cuts. Every time that something was happening in the field along the way, it got documented and closed out. And it actually created a nice culture on that job site, that by the time the architect put an issue into the system and our superintendent got out there to look at it, the subcontractor was already standing there fixing it.
Okay. Because they're just all in BIM 360 seeing this as it happens?
Yeah.
Okay. And it sounds like maybe the tech with Procore BIM 360 would help make this go away, but I know historically, and this was more than just on quality, it was just in general, like I know you would, so from time as a superintendent and going from job to job and working under different supers, I would see, wow, we do it this way here and we do it that way there. Or as a building inspector and walking Bond or Consigli or Lee Kennedy jobs, you would think that you would see some consistency. Oh, this is what a Dellbrook job looks like. This is what a Bond job looks like. But it seemed like it was very dependent on the leadership team. And I would imagine the same thing from a quality standpoint. How does the Procore tracking or BIM 360 tracking, does that kind of remove, or do you still struggle with inconsistency from project to project or even department to department? So like, okay, the project management folks and the APM are on board with their logs and everything, but we just can't get scheduling and estimating to buy in or to have this. Do you guys see any of that inconsistency across departments or job site to job site?
I would say that's one thing that we constantly try to evaluate and make sure we are being as consistent as we can. But again, at the same time, I think people come from all different backgrounds and experiences, and they've done it their way for so long. So when you bring somebody new into the team, they might have things that work well or just don't jive one way or the other. But it's something that it's a constant challenge and a constant reminder, and that's why we do our regular meetings, our regular discussions, and set our processes from estimating all the way through closeout and into our post-mortem meetings, so we can help try to make some consistency out of all these few hundred people in the field trying to get the job done.
Jason or Chris?
Yeah. I don't know if I'm allowed to say the word shit on this podcast, but if you are
Absolutely.
yeah, okay, good. If anybody on here, and Rob and Chris, I think are pretty honest guys. If anybody listening to this thinks that they have consistency across every project, there may be some basic level of consistency, but I would say that you're full of shit, because we see it. I've seen it for my entire career in construction. Some project teams execute better than other project teams. It's just, it's human nature. Some teams jive better than others. I will say that we've had, but it's taken time. We've had success with safety in getting a very basic level of consistency. And I'll tell you that at Lee Kennedy, we're not quite there yet. We don't have that consistency where we can say, all right, these basic functions are all the same, and now we're going to concentrate on the bells and whistles or the finer points of this program, or, you know, for lack of a better term here, the quality of the quality program, you know, just how well we do things. So we are inconsistent, but getting better, if that makes sense.
Yep. No, it does make sense. Thanks for your honesty. Chris?
Yeah, I mean, we've got the similar challenge right now with the different sectors that we're working inside of, whether it's a healthcare job, academic, plant, or a fit out job. Those jobs are set up with different types of teams, different schedules, and a large academic job has greater resources and more eyes on the job to be able to put a focus on quality, where a healthcare job could be a quick hit, one superintendent, a part-time project manager supporting them. So we do get greater inconsistency on those jobs. Even though the same number of submittals, same number of steps have to happen on that smaller job, it just happens so much faster. That creates an exposure risk on quality. Safety, like I agree with Jason that safety has become so consistently driven, but quality still seems like it can be tinkered with and reduced when the need comes.
Yeah, no, I mean, I hear a lot of people use the term culture when it comes to, obviously we know about safety, though we need a safety culture, but I've heard people that speak on it, and I've read stuff where they say you need the same thing, you need a culture of quality. Now, I don't know, is it that there are standards for safety where here's the minimum standard that everyone needs to be, and then therefore it's easy to extrapolate and say, okay, this is the Dellbrook or Lee Kennedy or Bond standard, and people know that that's kind of the law, right? Legitimately, that's the law. So this is where we have to be, or we will get fined, or someone will die. Quality is much more amorphous, right? Define quality. Okay, done right? Well, what's right? Tell me what's right, right? To the spec. Okay, well, what if something's not in the spec, right? So there's all that. It's a little bit more ambiguous, and I think all the more reason you need a focus in a culture to go with those processes. Because when I was listening to the three of you, there was a little overlap with all of you, but Rob pointed out people's backgrounds, right? Where they came from, so what skill set they're bringing to the table. And Jason was talking about how well the team works together. All of that is kind of like human dynamic, right? And Chris talked earlier about the people are the problem, right? Or not the people, but humans are problems, just the way we are, right? And then Chris interjected and said, and then depending on the ownership involvement and the complexity of the project, like it seems like that's why this is so difficult, right? These are challenges. If we could solve team building, how many companies try to figure out the right recipe for teams if they're doing assessments, personality assessments to mix the right people together? This is no easy feat. And I think that's probably why there's so much struggle and there's so many people. Like Rob really initiated this one, but the reason I listened to Rob when he said, "Hey, we should talk about quality control," is because he wasn't the first person that said it to me. There's a lot of people that are like, "Hey, we're trying to figure this out." CEOs that are saying, talking about it, whether they're talking about it via lessons learned or quality control, however they're going about it, it's a problem for everybody, and it's a problem without an easy solution. I think tech is part of it, but then you get that human element and it becomes really difficult because then we're talking about the teams and personalities and egos, right? Because egos come in when we're talking about, I don't want my job to be the one that is the sample of how it's done wrong, right? So I think this is an important conversation. I appreciate you guys being very candid about it. I think this candid nature helps everybody in the long run. So pardon the soapbox. There's no question in there.
Are you advocating to go full robot, Joe? Is that what you're get rid of the human element? Are you?
Talk to Chris. Chris would, I think, would be more of the full-on robot.
I'm not the robot guy.
No, okay.
Where you going with this conversation?
Yeah. No, I was just.
Building Trades Council is going to be upset with you. I can tell you that much.
They might be, but no, it's not. It's just that it's not about saying what way we should be going. It's more about just pointing out the fact that this is a really gnarly problem that even technology doesn't fix, because Jason, you talk about your nice checkbox, and that's Jason's job to do it, and there's a little check mark that he's supposed to fill out, but at the end of the day it doesn't get done. That's how do you solve that, right?
You gotta beat some ass.
There you go.
Yeah.
So let's go right on with technology. How much can technology help us? And I'm thinking both from a hardware perspective, whether it's like concrete sensors where they're monitoring the curing of concrete, it's pillar that's monitoring the humidity for wood floors going in, or if it's 3D scanning a floor to make sure it's accurate with the model, like from a hardware standpoint, or software, like you guys are talking about with Procore or class detection. What's out there? What are we using? How much can it solve? Go for it, Jason. Seeing you want to talk about robots, and unmute yourself first. There you go.
All right. Yep. So I'll talk about it from the process standpoint than some of the details of the minutia. The technology from the process standpoint and our ability to track it, the process. And again, we're trying to get to that basic consistent level where we can move past into a higher level of quality down the road, right? So one thing that we struggled with for the last, we'll say 3 years or 4 years since we really pushed the quality program, was our ability in real time to track which steps of the process were actually happening and happening effectively, right? So you held up that process diagram. The right-hand side of that shows how we're going to measure the effectiveness of that particular step. And we know that when we hit every step in the process along the way and we do a good job at it, the end result is better. Hands down, unequivocally, the result is better. But if we miss certain steps along the way, so how do we track that stuff real time to put the pressure on ourselves to really get the best product out of it that we can? So technology, we found a way to track it real time so that we know when a project team at different levels through our organization, we can tell whether the project team has done X, Y, and Z, or the PX has done their piece of the pie, or the quality director for us has done their piece of the pie. So we can track real time and put pressure on ourselves continuously throughout the process to constantly do the things that we say we're going to do. We have a great process in place. We just have to go execute it. So that's where technology is starting to help us tremendously. Here's a plug for Power BI, by the way. It's a plugin for Procore. It's helping us track our process.
What does that do on its face? Or just quickly, Jason.
It takes any of the inputs in a program like Procore, and it allows you to export those and manipulate those to see what you want to see. So if you want to look at, well, a lot of companies call them KPIs.
Yep.
Lee Kennedy calls them STMs, shit that matters. But we actually have a shit that matters dashboard that shows financials, quality, safety, and schedule, and we can track this stuff real time now to make sure that we're paying attention to the stuff that really does matter, shit that matters. But even at different levels, at the executive level, at the senior leadership level, we're paying attention to stuff that is important to us, and quality is one of those pieces now.
So it's like it's a plugin that allows you to kind of create a dashboard of things you want to see.
Yep, exactly.
All right. I'd love to go to Chris on this because for folks that might not know, Chris spent a lot of time on the technology side and the VDC side at Bond. And to me, it's interesting, right? Like you look at Jason and Rob come from a risk management safety background. Bond chose to take someone from what they're now calling integrated services, but from the VDC side and move them up. So help us out, Chris. What maybe even what's on the bleeding edge, or what are you using? If you could answer both, like what's your thoughts around technology solving this problem?
So one thing about technology, might be shocked by this answer because, yeah, my last 10 years of my career has been wrapped around technology and advancements, is that the technology is a tool, right? It's like a hammer or a wrench for the guy in the field. It's a way for our project teams to document the job and manage the project. And it cannot be a driving factor for your process. Too often, these technology softwares are causing us to modify our process or our workflow. What the software package out of the box says it should be. So having a strong process in place that can be supported by technology and interchanged amongst different technologies along the way, because gosh, the price of this technology can be astronomical at times, is really important. You have to have that process. Now, from the what's coming down the line standpoint, we're heavily using our laser scanners to document projects. And it's not just for the floor flatness, it's all through the course of the install, going out there and doing checks and balances, comparing it back to the model and to the design. And then we're also have been really investing in augmented reality, being able to put the headset, HoloLens headset on and go out in the field and see what is supposed to be built in the space before it physically gets built. Stand there with a headset and watch the worker put a piece of ductwork up and make sure it goes right where that model had it coordinated. Because the construction tolerances are becoming even tighter in the field or for the spatial constraints. We're layering on the increases in code requirements for elements that are making things bigger, but our buildings aren't getting bigger. Our existing buildings aren't bigger. So we're trying to layer in those two technologies of laser scanning and augmented reality to catch things earlier in the process.
Now, how about so it's I was hearing there's a little bit of it there, but how many people are using and it's probably everybody to some degree, but I'm thinking like really challenging details where you have the ability to build it in the model first to troubleshoot, not just clash detection like everybody's doing where, okay, the pipe's going to be higher or lower because the ductwork's this big. Are you guys starting to come across areas where, okay, hey, this canopy section is really complicated. There's a bunch of different things coming in. Are you guys using modeling and then scanning and mock-ups and all of them collectively to really help on the quality control, or?
Unmuted. No, not as
No?
much as we could or should. To be perfectly honest, if there is a complex system that's in place, we have the department that can do the modeling in advance to really iron out some of the details. And the most common thing that comes to mind are waterproofing details, right?
Mm-hmm.
Very, very common. Always a complicated system when you think about, especially an envelope. So we do have the ability to do it, but I don't think that we do it near as often as we can. And again, this goes back to that age-old dilemma that we have. There's a disconnect between the contractor or the construction team and the design team, right? We always say, yeah, you guys own that. It's part of the design as the design team. Where in reality, that symbiotic relationship between the two of us really should be there. And modeling is a lot of times the bridge that helps overcome that gap. It could be, but we don't use it near enough.
Yeah, that point of the waterproofing is a great one where it's such a fine detail that you can't even model and appreciate the complexity of that inside of a model. So you have to go back to the submittals, the overlays, and 2D details.
How about you, Rob? Any thoughts on technology or?
Yeah, I would say we're probably in the same boat as Jason. We see it. We certainly see it. We have, at least from an MEP standpoint, we have our department helping in that regard. But I think there's always opportunity to use the newest technologies that are out there. We use on a daily basis, like I said, mentioned before, Procore to document our process and then pull out all the information to see how we're doing. But the modeling is something we definitely do. But I would say it's more project to project than a standard.
Do people think that we should be using that more? Or there's not really that much, or we're too early? Are we too early, or?
There's an opportunity there, but it's almost, to us, my gut tells me that it's a bell and a whistle right now. Meaning we really need to get good at the basics before we can move on to something that is really going to provide a lot of value in the future. I want to get good at the basics first.
Chris?
Yeah, I mean, at Bond, we take it beyond the MEPs. We're definitely heavily focused on the structure, and we model out a lot of architectural components that the design teams don't model, that are physically there in the field. So we try to address all of those items early on in the model, but when you get down to those fine-grained details of systems tying together, it's still back to the basics.
Okay. All right. So you're adding in the architectural and structural from okay, got a W24, and then we need to put this size ductwork underneath it, and we need a ceiling height of X. Does it all fit? So we're doing that, but we're not at the point where, okay, this canopy where we need the steel and the glass and the brick panel where they all meet in a corner, getting that modeled yet, we're not there yet. Is that fair?
The details of that connection, yeah.
Yeah. Okay, that's helpful. So Jason alluded to this in his, death by 1,000 cuts, and Rob started to talk about it a bit. So I'll go to Rob because I think we heard a little bit from Jason. I have thoughts when I was thinking about this process. And as I said earlier, you hear people often talk about the big ticket items, whether it's MEP or the entire building envelope because of water issues. There are the big items. I'll go the way people are looking. The big items that make up the large, big ticket, like eye-popping stuff that gets everyone's attention. And then there's all the smaller items. There's a concept out there in more of like the tech space around the long tail. And I'll explain it for anyone that doesn't know what it is. I'll try to verbally explain it. It's hard without looking at it, but it looks a little bit, think of like a comet. And if folks can mute just because I'm hearing a lot of reverb. Think of like a comet where one end is really big. And if we go to like a record store model or a CD store model, in the old days, you had the hits, and there's only so much space in the store to carry CDs. So you would have to carry the ones that most people wanted. But now in the modern world, with the ability to put a million or a billion options to listen to on your virtual store, what they're finding is that all those small ones equal more than the hits, right? So if you add up all the small ones, they end up being more than the hits. So to tie that to construction, yes, the curtain wall, the roof, or the MEP problems are big ticket items, but all the little ones, as Jason says, those 1,000 cuts really end up costing you more. How do we go after the 1,000 cuts? Or is it too big of a challenge? And this is a very open-ended question. Or is it too big of a challenge? Let's just get the big ones first. We'll go after them after. How do you guys look? And I'll start with Rob. How do you kind of tackle that challenge? And unmute yourself.
It's a huge challenge to identify all those little items. Again, we're in construction, and I think by and large, our teams are there to solve problems, and so they solve a problem and move on to the next one. And then we have all these processes in place. Say, hey, we want you to report, and enter in this item, everything that you do. And I think to some degree, we want that information, but it may be somewhat unrealistic all the time to gather those little ones. And let's be real, the big ones, that's what captures everybody's attention, these big loss items, and all the smaller ones, we fix them and we move on. So in an ideal world, yeah, we would want to capture those little ones. We'd want to see, what's the value of that little one? How much did it have a schedule impact? How much time did we spend on it? And we do that. We tried our best to utilize our observations and our monthly meetings and in our events tracking logs. But I would agree with you that, if we were able to accurately identify all of them and put some type of value to it, yeah, you're probably I think there's a good chance you're going to add up to, those more than those bigger ones over time. But the challenge is how do we get everybody to report all the little ones instead of just fixing a problem in the field like our teams are used to doing, and then just, moving on with the item, on to the next one. So.
Yeah. I mean, am I wrong when I say, because at first we might think like, okay, hey, this was a minor thing, but when you look at like the cost of an RFI, there's been some folks that have tried to analyze that, in just the process of an hour for the architect and the engineer and the owner and the APM, you add up all that time, right? It's just, I think people might underestimate how much dollar value is in some of these smaller ones. Am I wrong, or?
No, I would agree with you. I think, again, I don't know that on the bigger ones, I think we do a lot of that. How much time did it take us to investigate and, discuss and resolve and move on? But you're right. I think, there's lots of studies out there, but, cost of incidents, when you add in all the soft items that we don't necessarily see and touch and feel, you are going to be probably 25, 30% higher, if you were able to capture all that accurately in terms of how much it cost you or how much extra time it took to actually do something about the issue.
Who else? What do we think are some of the other approaches to that? Is it a phased thing? Is it something that your company wants to actually go after that long tail at the same time, or what's
it's a culture thing. It's how that team, we touched on it earlier, that how the team dynamic is and interacts with each other, and the buy-in by your subcontractors. I referenced that job that had 14,000 issues over the course of it, but you walked out onto that job site and there was a culture, there was a feeling of quality, and nothing was going to get by that project. And then it wasn't just the project team, it was the subcontractors, it was the design team, it was the owner. So I think culture plays a big piece in it of how the team is working together. And if you're going to focus on the big items as they come up, or making sure you don't get bit by them again, versus going after everything consistently every day.
Yeah, so it takes a while to refine your process, right? I don't care who you are or what you're talking about. It takes a while, and this one is a really, really good lessons learned for us. We're talking about lessons learned and trying to apply those to that. That just these death by 1,000 cuts, thousands and thousands of these mini lessons learned, or a rework, or a change order, or something. But how do you get consistent across an organization? And I talked a couple of minutes ago about the shit that matters. And one of the things that we're starting to do with consistency, in fact, we are doing it with consistency now. We're having a ton of success with it at Lee Kennedy. We're not perfect. I'm not bragging or anything, guys. I'm just telling you, we're starting to have some success with our product executives, where we have a monthly meeting with every one of the product teams. So each product exec, and there are 3 or 4 projects or 5 projects, they have a monthly meeting. Formatting that monthly meeting so that we talk about the things that are important. One of them being quality, right? What do we have coming up that we need to pay attention to over the next 1 month, right? A 1 month look ahead at that meeting. Or conversely, with those 1,000 little paper cuts, what's happened to us in the last month where we can report out, and we're putting pressure on our project teams to say, hey, wait a minute, didn't we just have this happen? So why is this not in the lessons learned system? Why are we not trending this? Why are we not tracking it? So getting to the point where the leadership, it's really about the leadership, creating that culture of openness and honesty, and talking about it at a regular basis, right? Just starting with that monthly meeting. We know we've seen the number of lessons learned that have been put into our system almost double in the last few months, because people are talking about it. So it's great. It's going to produce a ton of fruit down the end. We know that.
Wow, that's great. Okay, well, I like that we came back to culture. I think that's interesting. You know what I am curious about? I expected to hear a lot more come up in this conversation about rework and the cost of coming back. And I heard Rob mention it from a perspective of client satisfaction. But like, when I think of quality control, it would really be around all right, we don't want to have comeback work. We don't want rework on the job, and we don't want to have to go back out there after we've turned this thing over, because that's just a killer from a cost perspective, and a client satisfaction. Like, oh, we were done. There was the regular hurdles along the way, but we ended up with a great product. We were happy with it, versus, when we're having to drag the contractor back here to solve problems, it ends kind of more on not a sour note, but just a different note rather than a high note. Any thoughts around those two things about rework, comeback, client satisfaction? Am I wrong?
No, Rob's not muted, so I'm going to jump in. Rob was muted, but rework for us happens, right? It happens to every contractor. We have to come back after the project's over. But I'll tell you what the bigger problem is. It's the rework during the project that adds to schedule days. And if you add the schedule days and you start to compress schedule, everything else goes to shit. The safety, the quality, everything else goes to crap. So if we miss a detail at something where we have to go back and open up a wall, we're impacting 6 other trades. And it is just an awful, awful snowball effect. So in our world, the rework that we have during the product almost always far outweighs what we have come back for after the product's over and completed. And I'll tell you what, making that connection with the lessons learned, if you start to associate the word rework or go back or whatever term you use with a lessons learned, meaning get it in the system, capture it, then that data over time is going to become really, really clear on where we can improve. Not where we screw things up, but where we can improve. It's that example of the studs that I used earlier. So rework during the project kills us.
Yeah, I want to go to Rob, but that's really interesting that you would say rework during the job is worse than comeback to try and delineate comeback after the fact. But it makes sense. Yeah, Rob.
Yeah, and I would agree with that. I think something that adds, to the stress and the frustration at the job level is just what Jason had mentioned. And, we obviously reducing rework, reducing comebacks, getting better at closeout, all leads to, a happy client and a happy team at the end of the day, right? And better relationships with subs and, and all of that. And so, again, we put a big emphasis on our first inspections process, starting a few years ago, to help make sure that the right product shows up the first time, right? Instead of, we end up putting, backsplash tile in, it's all the wrong color. And now we're at the end of the job. We have no more time left, but yet we got to go rip out, 50 units worth of backsplash tile. And now it's schedule and it's time. And we're working, like Jason said, all these crazy hours just to make up for something that we easily could have solved. So yeah, I would say, the rework during construction is probably, I would agree 100% more frustrating and stressful for the teams as a whole, and leaves a lasting impression, because a lot of these things, we find as we get further on in the job, when, those are the things that we remember, how we finish, not everything that went well during the job. It's, one little thing at the end that didn't go well that pushed us over the schedule or created heartache for everybody on the team, including the owner, the architect, and so forth. So, we do spend a lot of time talking about those little things and really focusing on doing it the best we can the first time to help prevent that down the road. So it's a big issue. And again, it goes to, we probably don't really know the magnitude of all of that added up across all projects on what the real impact of that is.
That's interesting. That was kind of my next question. Is there any way to, because Jason threw in all the other factors that go along with schedule, and then now we're rushing, so we have some safety issues. Is there any way to quantify the magnitude of rework and what that costs on a job?
We try to through our lessons learned, impacts and so forth, but, we definitely don't take into account all the, off hours conversations about things that we have between project teams, superintendents, director field ops, all of that. We definitely don't capture all of that time here and there that we have to deal with these issues. We come together, we figure it out, and we move on. But we definitely don't do a good job, I don't think, getting the real costs in all these scenarios. It's tough. It's tough to capture all that.
Chris?
And beyond just the cost, it's the worker satisfaction. Nobody likes to do things twice. Nobody likes to come back. So you can see it in the trades when on a project. There's job sites where the guys just want to come to your site because things are clicking, things are going in nicely, there's a nice process and checks and balances. And then the jobs that are triggering rework, whether it's by the fault of a subcontractor or a change by the design team, really kills the morale of the individuals, the team, and the installers. And you can see the workers coming in, they're grumpy, they don't want to be there, and you're not getting the best productivity. So it's hard to capture all the cost related to that impact of things. Yeah, you can collect the materials and the labor time, but it has a greater lasting ripple effect on the job site.
I think that's a great point. It's the odd timing of this. I was just thinking about this morning, and I've thought about it in the past, which is, a lot of times we separate out labor from, even though it might be supers or whatever, it might be looked at as blue collar versus like the white collar. Like we look at folks working in the office or working for our companies and team building and employee satisfaction and all that kind of stuff. But then we sometimes think of labor as just labor, just as a number, as man hours or whatever we're tracking for productivity. But I just shared this morning something on Instagram, and it was along the lines of basically that, the greatest way to hurt one of the worst things you can do to a great employee is leave a bad employee in place. Very frustrating, right? So the best thing you can do for them is to remove the bad person, because it just shows that, that's not acceptable. The first person that liked that right away, guy that's a laborer for Local 22. And when you see these business quotes and thoughts about employment and leadership, you think about the person that's a project manager or an assistant super or something like that, and, weeding out the bad employees to show the good employees what you value. But that holds true, like Chris is saying, to that person out in the field. They don't want to. Nobody likes to do something and then have to go back to do it again. It's painful. So I think that's a great point. I think it's something for us to really consider, and that goes back to the personal side of things, right? So culture certainly matters throughout that entire life cycle and everybody on the project. So thanks for pointing that out, Chris. So real quick, I would like to close with, and I didn't mention this to you guys because I just wanted you to shoot from the hip kind of pretty quick. What do you feel like you do best, and what do you feel like you need the most work on? And I guess let's start with Chris from a quality standpoint.
Our guys at Bond, our guys do really good at installing what they know, and they're very specialized to the project types. So we've got the varying sectors. The piece that we are weakest on is documenting that. And I really wish we would document more positive observations than looking strictly and thinking of the program strictly as a negative observation and issue. We want to show the clients that we're managing the jobs and really highlight the good work that was done before it got closed up. So that way nobody can ever come back and question what you did. And that is the big revamp of the program that's underway.
Awesome. Thanks, Chris. How about you, Rob?
If we're talking about our program internally, where we've come from, where we are, I would say our first inspection process has captured a lot of, we call them catches, things that we catch before we install the wrong product, in the field that could lead to a significant impact on the job. And the whole conversation we just had about the workers and the frustration level in the teams and all that. So that's going really well for us. What we've recently revamped is our benchmark / we're calling them divisional inspections, really giving our teams better tools to do their job, giving them kind of guides on, important things that we see to make sure we're looking at on a regular basis to help ensure closeout punch lists, work to complete lists are being done efficiently and effectively to help with the overall satisfaction on the job all around. So I would say that's where our focus is right now, is on our divisional inspections throughout the job.
Okay, so that first pass is what you're doing right. What's the one you're struggling with the most?
I would say that would be at our what we used to call benchmark inspections, where the major items on the job are doing formal, more in-depth reviews of those processes, and then how often we do it thereafter. So that's been our biggest challenge, I think, to date in our program, and that's been our new focus in our new revamp and next phase, if you will, of our program.
Got it. All right, sorry, that was my misunderstanding. How about you, Jason? What are you guys doing really well, and what's something that you're struggling with?
I was just thinking it's got to be pretty tough to work for Dellbrook or Bond. Sounds like you guys screw up a lot of stuff. We're perfect. We don't actually screw up anything, which is nice. Makes our jobs a lot easier.
A lot of foul language. Rob has catches. You guys have shit. I mean, maybe you could work on your professionalism, but that's
catches. That's not foul. I'm actually watching my language today. So what we do well and this is a little esoteric, and I get it. But what we do well is the executive leadership through the project staff and kind of the buy-in to the process, because we don't create these things in a vacuum. And I think I talked at the beginning about integrating steps into the quality management process into our existing construction steps. So that there's a pretty high level of buy-in. From a process standpoint, we're refining the process now to where it's legitimate. It's not something that we tote in front of an owner to brag. It actually works. It's producing goods. So the process is pretty sound. We do that the best. Meaning actually implement the steps in the process. We're starting to get really good at that. Where we fall down, and it's funny, I'm going to give you the answer where we fall down. We fall down at doing inspections. But the reason that we fall down for doing inspections is really the failure. It's not that we don't do them. It's the reason that we haven't done them. We kind of succumbed to what I'll call lazy management. We rolled out this great process for quality, and we said, hey, project staff, we want you to do a certain number of inspections and go out and look at quality. Do some first delivery checklists, do some ongoing work checklists, use the engineer's reports and get them into the system. And we fell flat, completely flat. So fast forward a couple of versions later, a year and a half or so into the next version of quality, we said, okay, field staff, we're not really hitting the inspections the way that we want. We know there's value in them, but we're not hitting them. So we're going to ask you to do an inspection a week. Have fun. Go out and do an inspection a week, and we're going to measure that. And instantly we get some pushback from the field. And one of our project managers came up to us and said, listen, I'm working this project and I kicked ass at managing quality. I actually implemented the process. So why are you telling me now that I have to go out and do an inspection a week? And we said, you know what, you're right. So we changed that process once again, where we actually develop a plan for the project at the beginning of the project about the stuff that's important to that project. Here are the 12 items or 27 items or 35 items that we really need to pay attention to in this process, in this project. And these are the inspections that are associated with these 12 items that are really important to the project. So we fail miserably at that, but we're in recovery mode right now, if that makes sense.
How do you determine what are the items to focus on?
It's funny, but if the picture of the process that you held up, Joe,
mm-hmm.
It builds all the way up to the QA/QC kickoff. You know, a high-tech guy would have allowed me to share my screen and I would have thrown it up there, but whatever, you can just hold it up again.
You can share your screen. You have the ability.
I'll describe it, but there are 5 or 6 steps before we actually get to the point on a project where we mobilize, and every one of those steps produces something. When we oh, look at, there it is. You're so high tech, Joe. I didn't know. Like when we have the schedule established, there are things that we need to pay attention to. We know that the lead time for this kind of curtain wall system or this kind of electrical fixture is going to be an issue. So we're identifying that in the schedule, and we're actually pulling it out and assigning it as a task to somebody in Procore to get the submittal in by this date. That at the early DD and page turning sessions, where you're working from conceptual design into DD and CD, really, you're pulling stuff out along the way and saying, hey, this could be an issue. We're going to track this, and here's how we're going to track it. Here's what we're going to do about it. So every one of these steps builds into the QA/QC or QMS kickoff meeting, and you've almost always, when you do it right, have that list established. Here are the 12 things or the 14 things, because we built for the last 6 months leading into that meeting.
Okay. So it almost spits out the other end during that you go through that process, and then those things come out the other end.
Yeah. There's one more addition to that real quick. And it's, the next step if you look at our process, is the sub kickoff meeting. We end up adding to our initial list of those 12 or 15 important things for this project through the sub kickoff meeting. The sub will come to us and say, hey, this wood ceiling design is going to be a bear to install, and we're going to need to make sure that we have X, Y, and Z on the underside of the slab so we can do X, Y, and Z. So we end up pulling stuff out of that occasionally and adding it into, actually more than occasionally, adding it into what we have to pay attention to at the project level. And we actually assign tasks or inspections for every single one of those items that comes up. That's That's where we're going to get good at it.
Well, okay. All right. I want to thank all three of you. This was a really big subject to tackle. I don't feel like I did a fantastic job at it, but I feel like
I think you kicked ass, Joe.
well, you guys did well. I hopefully there's going to be some takeaways here that people can learn from this, because that's kind of the goal of all this. But they couldn't learn without the three of you offering your opinions, your approaches, and I really hope that people that are listening will give us some feedback. And if I get any feedback, I'll be happy to share it with you. We're trying to help everybody get better. I'm trying to get better at asking the right questions, but I do want to continue on this theme. And with future podcasts, I have some lined up already, and there's maybe some that I haven't thought of that will come out from people's feedback. But Rob, Chris, Jason, thanks a lot. Appreciate you spending the time, and hopefully it helped even you guys to just kind of talk through things.
Thank you, Joe. I love what you're doing, man.
Joe.
Stuff, it's great.
Awesome.
Yeah,
Thanks.
Change the hard background too. I'm sending you one. The three of us in Bovis in the background.
No. Hang on. Where's my Dellbrook baseball
Dellbrook.
hat?
On and Lee Kennedy next time.
And actually that's a good point though. Thanks to Lee Kennedy and Bond and Dellbrook JKS for their willingness to let you guys come on and share what you guys are learning. Okay.
Good stuff.
Thanks, guys. All right.
Thanks, guys.
Yep.
Take
If you
care.
want to hang on, I'm just going to end recording and then we can talk.